Hey YouTube, it's Dimitri, and today I'm going to answer a subscriber's question. So it's really part of another question, but E asks, why do you want to stay in Dallas? Just curious. And I talk a lot about Dallas. I talk a lot about Texas, and I talk a lot about I'm not leaving. I don't want to leave. And so I'm going to just dive into this a little bit. I've kind of covered this in past videos, but not really directly on this question. And let's just start off with here the basic facts. I used to live in New York City. I lived there for a year. More technically, I lived in New Jersey and Weehawken. And yes, I did live in Long Island City, which is part of Queens. I lived on the Upper East Side for a short stint as well. And then I finally moved to New Jersey, where I lived for almost a full year here. So I left New York City and I came to Dallas, Texas, which is where I started my career. No, I'm not from Texas. I'm not from the South of the United States. I'm actually from the Pacific Northwest. So opposite side of the country from, New Jersey, New York, and all that. But why did I leave New York? Why am I living in Texas? Why do I refuse to leave? A few things. So one being salary for quants doesn't vary much depending where you live. So you could live in New York City. You could live in Dallas. You could live, Boston. You could live in Chicago. You could live in North Carolina. You could live, in Montana, Idaho, somewhere else. The thing is, your salary is going to be almost the exact same, if not the exact same, no matter where you live. So it really comes down to cost of living here to start with here. And I'll put this picture up here on the screen on the composite cost of living index. This comes from, I think, the state of Missouri. Gives you kind of a breakdown here. And if you look at cost of living, Texas falls in at 15. So you have to consider this from a quant perspective as well. There are only so many states a quant can actually live and work in because there's not a lot of remote working. So you're going to have New York City, Chicago, North Carolina, Boston, Dallas, and there's going to be a few other states, a few other cities, depending if banks are located there and you work on the banking side. Again, if you work at a hedge fund, you work in wealth management, you might live in California or somewhere else. But those are kind of the big hot spots to live here. Now, if you look at this listing here quickly, you will notice that Texas is basically the cheapest place to live for quants. So cost of living is huge here. Now, to give you perspective of this, right, my cost to live in New York City was double my cost to live in Dallas. So when I moved, my salary stayed the same. I paid for my moving expenses to move back to Dallas. And now I'm making basically double. So my standard of living, my leisureness is through the roof compared to New York City. So there's absolutely no reason for me to live in New York City. Now, the second piece here too is I left New York City because I wanted to start a family, and having kids in New York City, New Jersey, that tri-state area is way too expensive. It makes absolutely no sense if you want to start a family and stay there. So New York is amazing for jobs. Chicago is amazing for jobs as well, because you can bounce around between a variety of firms in the quant finance realm. There's lots of opportunity. But if you want to have a life, you want to grow up, you want to be an adult, you want to start a family, it's not feasible. New York City's and tri-states public schools aren't stellar. So a lot of parents, families send their kids to private schools, not public schools. So it's no longer free. You pay a bunch of money for that. Daycare, the cost of daycare, the cost of food, all these other things start adding up in a family environment. It doesn't make a lot of sense to stay in New York City. And then to put this back in a lifestyle perspective of who I am, I don't like being crammed into an apartment or a condo. I need to live out. I had a buddy of mine that bought a house. Him and his wife bought this house in New Jersey here, similar to where we were at. It's like $600,000. The same house, square footage wise, on 1.25 acre was half the cost. So I have like a massive amount of land here, which I actually want. That's a lifestyle choice. And then on top of that, I'm not crammed in. I don't have an hour and a half, 2-hour commute each way. So Texas is an all-star winner for that. So cost of living is the big one. The second piece here now is Dallas also has a fair amount of quant jobs, and it's kind of moving towards this direction. So all the banks originally moved their jobs from New York City into New Jersey to save some cost. Now they've realized Dallas, Texas is far cheaper. So the banks that are here, just off the top of my head, JP Morgan, Chase, Citibank, Goldman Sachs, Santander Consumers divisions here, Toyota, so if you do financing for a Toyota, I know it seems kind of odd, DTCC, which is the clearing houses here. There are a handful of other firms as well. There's not a lot of hedge funds though. So you're going to have to weigh that pros and cons, where you want to work, what you want to do. There are some fintech startups here I've talked to as well. Interesting opportunities. So Texas has a lot of this. And now the other piece here too as well, let's talk about taxes, because taxes, they just screw you over here. The number one state with the highest taxes in the United States, according to Wallet Hub, which I will link and put a shot on this, is New York City. If you go down through the list here, you see that, New Jersey is number 6. California is number 9. I don't know if I can find Illinois right off the top of my head here, but it's not looking so great. Like, these are really high taxed areas, and Texas comes in at 32 here. So tax burden wise, Texas is looking really good. The other stance here too is thinking about how you live, how you spend, what taxes are going to hit you. The big tax in Texas is going to be your real estate tax. So Texas does not have an income tax. So the more money I make, the more I progress career-wise, that doesn't really impact how much tax I'm paying at a state level. But how big your house is, for example, pays a lot of tax out for that. That covers a lot of things like education, paying for public schools, paying for roads, paying for all those sorts of things. Texas also is a final note here, why I like Texas. Texas is cheap, but also Texas has a lot of amenities of a big city here in Dallas. DFW, so Dallas-Fort Worth area put together, is the 4th largest metroplex in the country. So you have New York, you have LA, you have Chicago, and then you have DFW as a metroplex. You're the 4th largest. They have almost anything under the sun here that you would want to do in a city. It's all here nicely located inside of Texas. Now, quickly, the things I do not like about Texas that I can't stand about Texas, that's going to be just the environment of the nature kind of area here. So I grew up in the mountains. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I grew up riding motorcycles. I grew up, gardening and doing all kinds of stuff, which you can do in Texas, but it's flatter than flat here. There's no skiing. It's hard to find a mountain unless you go all the way to the west side of the state here. It's hot. It's dry in many areas, and it's humid. So it's not really that dry, but it's hot, so it makes it seem dry. It's hot and humid here, though. There's not a lot of outdoor activities that I'm used to doing here, so I'm not stellar on that. That's kind of the big downside for me. That's why I'd prefer to live somewhere like Washington or New York, maybe, perhaps. But when you look at taxes, cost of living, job opportunities as well, right, you're going to be narrowed down to these big cities. For me, Dallas is the clear winner. Cost of living, the ability to do things too. So imagine trying to find over an acre in, New Jersey, New York, or Connecticut to do things that I like to do, like beekeeping, gardening, restoring cars, having space to do that. You're going to have to weigh these things in your own. I would encourage many of you to think far beyond your 3-year, 5-year plan here. Do you want to get married? Do you want to have kids? Do you want to have a life? Probably the worst advice I continually see that people state is, I'm going to be successful and I'm going to do this career thing for a very short period of time. I'm going to make a ton of money and then I'm going to go do something else. And then, then I'll have time to do that. Well, you're going to get old. You're not going to be able to do a lot of things you wanted to do. I love racing motorcycles, for example. I haven't raced in years. I need to hurry up because I'm getting pretty old for the racing scenes. Just for fun, that was a hobby. I'm getting old, so I can't do these sorts of things. Also, once you get so far into career and you're making so much money, most of you are not going to step away if you can and if you're great at it. Also, finding another job, another career, somewhere to step back into is far harder than you think. It's not like you run out there, you make $300,000-$400,000 a year, you're rich and everything's great and everything's running, well, and you're in New York City, and then magically you turn 35 or something, and then you just, up and leave, find someone, start a family, and do all this within a year or two. It doesn't happen. It's not really good advice. You're not going to have the same flexibility when you're older that you have when you're younger. So those are my tips. That's why I'm living in Dallas, Texas. That's why I will not leave for the most part. There might be ways to consider to persuade me to leave, but I doubt it. Anyways, thanks for watching. And as always, until next time.